If you've been following Pi Network, you've likely wondered, why isn't Pi available on major exchanges like Coinbase or Binance? At first glance, it might seem like a red flag. Perhaps the project isn't legitimate, or maybe it lacks the technical requirements for listing. But the reality is far more calculated. Pi Network is deliberately avoiding these platforms, not because it can't secure a listing, but because it's navigating one of the biggest challenges in crypto today: regulatory survival. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, has declared war on cryptocurrencies it deems unregistered securities. Projects like XRP, Telegram's Ton, and even major exchanges like Coinbase itself have faced brutal legal battles. Pi Network is sidestepping this minefield with a carefully crafted strategy, one that could determine whether it thrives long-term or becomes another casualty of regulation. Let's break it down. The SEC, under Chair Gary Gensler, has taken an aggressive stance against crypto projects that it believes qualify as securities. The consequences of being labeled as such are severe. Legal battles that can drag on for years, as seen with XRP. Massive fines that drain project resources force delistings from major exchanges, killing liquidity. Potential shutdowns of the entire project. Pi Network's team understands this risk all too well. Instead of rushing into Western markets and inviting scrutiny, they've taken a different path, focusing first on regions where regulatory pressure is lighter. The Asia and Africa strategy. Pi has strategically listed on exchanges like OKX, MEX, and BitGet, platforms that primarily serve Asian and African markets. These regions have more flexible crypto regulations, allowing Pi to build liquidity and adoption without immediate SEC interference. Countries like Vietnam, Nigeria, and India have seen rapid Pi adoption, with merchants and users transacting in Pi daily. This isn't just about avoiding the SEC, it's about building a strong foundation before entering more hostile regulatory environments. By establishing real-world utility and a trading history outside the US, Pi strengthens its case for being classified as a utility token rather than a security, a crucial distinction for long-term survival. In 2020, XRP was one of the most widely traded cryptocurrencies, available on nearly every major exchange, including Coinbase. But when the SEC sued Ripple, alleging XRP was an unregistered security, the fallout was catastrophic. XRP was delisted from Coinbase, Binance US, and others overnight. Its price plummeted over 70% in days. Ripple spent 3 years and hundreds of millions in legal fees fighting the case. Even after a partial victory in court, XRP's reputation and market position were permanently damaged. Pis Smarter Approach. Delayed entry. Stronger defense. Pi Network is avoiding this scenario entirely by staying off US exchanges until the regulatory landscape becomes clearer. Instead, it's focusing on proving utility first. Unlike many speculative tokens, Pi is pushing real-world use cases, from peer-to-peer transactions to merchant adoption. Waiting for regulatory clarity. The SEC's stance on crypto may shift, especially after the 2024 US elections. Pi is positioning itself to enter the US market only when the rules are more favorable. Building an unstoppable global network, with millions of users in Asia and Africa, Pi is creating a decentralized economy that regulators can't easily shut down. This isn't a sign of weakness, it's a long-term survival tactic. Ethereum took a similar path, gradually proving its utility before gaining regulatory acceptance. Pi is following that blueprint. When will Pi finally list on Coinbase and Binance? The question of when Pi Network will become available on major Western exchanges like Coinbase and Binance is one that weighs heavily on the minds of its community. While there is no definitive timeline, several key factors will determine when, and if, this milestone is achieved. The answer lies at the intersection of regulatory developments, market conditions, and Pi Network's own strategic roadmap. Post-2024 US elections. A potential turning point. The regulatory environment in the United States is currently in flux, and the outcome of the 2024 elections could significantly influence cryptocurrency policies. A change in administration or shifts in congressional leadership may lead to more favorable legislation, such as clearer guidelines on what constitutes a security versus a utility token. Some political candidates have already expressed pro-crypto stances, suggesting that the next few years could bring meaningful reform. If regulatory agencies like the SEC face pressure to adopt a more balanced approach, projects like Pi Network may find it safer to engage with US-based exchanges without fear of immediate legal repercussions. SEC guidelines. The need for clarity. Even with political changes, the SEC's stance on cryptocurrency regulation remains a critical hurdle. The agency has historically taken an aggressive approach, but recent court losses, such as the partial victory for Ripple in its XRP case, indicate that its authority is not absolute. If future rulings further limit the SEC's ability to classify decentralized digital assets as securities, Pi Network's path to listing on major exchanges becomes much clearer. Additionally, if the SEC eventually approves a Bitcoin spot ETF or establishes more concrete rules for altcoins, it could set a precedent that benefits utility-driven projects like Pi. Until then, the team is likely to remain cautious, prioritizing jurisdictions where regulatory risks are lower. Ecosystem maturity. Building an unstoppable network. Perhaps the most important factor is Pi Network's own growth and adoption. Exchanges like Coinbase and Binance carefully vet projects before listing them, considering factors such as user base, liquidity, and real-world utility. Pi's focus on organic adoption, through its mobile mining model, peer-to-peer transactions, and merchant integrations, is designed to create a self-sustaining economy that regulators cannot easily dismiss as speculative. If the network reaches a critical mass of users and transactions, particularly in regions where it is already gaining traction, it becomes increasingly difficult for regulators to justify aggressive action. Furthermore, a robust ecosystem reduces reliance on Western exchanges, meaning Pi could thrive even without immediate US listings. The domino effect. How listings could unfold once the regulatory and adoption conditions are met. The process of listing on major exchanges could happen relatively quickly. Typically, a project begins with Tier 2 exchanges before moving up to platforms like Kraken, Crypto.com, and eventually Coinbase and Binance. Pi's team may also pursue strategic partnerships to facilitate this transition, such as collaborations with compliant trading platforms or financial institutions. When the first major US exchange lists Pi, it could trigger a domino effect, with others following suit to avoid missing out on trading volume. When this happens, the impact could be enormous. A Coinbase or Binance listing would bring massive liquidity from institutional and retail investors. Explosive price movement as pent-up demand meets limited supply. Mainstream legitimacy, pushing Pi into the top-tier crypto conversation. Pi Network's absence from Coinbase isn't a failure, it's a carefully calculated move to avoid becoming the next XRP. By prioritizing global adoption, real-world utility, and regulatory prudence, Pi is setting itself up for sustainable success. The trade-off? Short-term traders may be frustrated by the wait. But for those who understand the bigger picture, Pi's strategy could mean the difference between a flash in the pan token and a lasting, globally adopted cryptocurrency. What do you think? Is Pi's patience a genius move, or should they take the risk and list now? Drop your thoughts below. And if you found this breakdown valuable, don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into crypto's most intriguing projects.